Hello and welcome to episode 124 of the Meet the Farmers podcast. I'm your host, Ben Eagle, and today I'm speaking to Adele Jones, who is Deputy CEO at the Sustainable Food Trust. Adele has risen through the ranks at the Trust, having started in 2013 as their Projects and Fundraising Officer. She has a degree in Geography, Soil Science, Climate Change and Sustainability from the University of Exeter, and has also worked as a policy advisor on secondments at DEFRA and for the Welsh Government. Adele, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. And thanks for having me, Ben. I've listened to quite a lot of your podcasts in the past, so I feel honoured to be here, especially because I'm not actually a farmer, so I feel like a little bit of an intruder.
Not at all, not at all, because the regular listeners will know that I've sort of moved, but broadening out, because I think it's really important that, as you know more than most, how important it is to have a breadth of voices when we're talking about food and farming. So can we start actually by talking about the Sustainable Food Trust itself? A lot of listeners will have heard about it, I know, and know about its focus and work, but can you give us some background to it and explain what its aims are?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Sustainable Food Trust was set up back in 2010, actually, but we got charitable status in 2012. And it was set up by Patrick Holden, who is our director. And he was previously the chief executive of the Soil Association for about 15 years. And he decided to move on from the Soil Association and set up the SFT. And we've been running ever since. And broadly, our objective is to accelerate the transition towards more sustainable food and farming systems. We're based here in the UK, but we actually have an international focus as well. And a lot of our work over the last 10 or so years has been focused on how we can improve the business case for sustainable food production, because as many of your listeners will, I'm sure, sympathize with, producing food in a way which is genuinely climate friendly, nature friendly, public health friendly, you could say, has not always been the most profitable means of producing food, and it has been somewhat of an uphill battle. I think that's changing now, and we'll talk about that later. But that has formed a lot of our work, and that involves obviously working closely with farmers to understand what changes they need to make to be part of the sort of future of agriculture, which is part of the climate change solution, but also what policy incentives should be introduced to, again, improve that business case, and also the market incentives. And at the same time, we work to try and shift the public perception around the need to support sustainable food and farming. So that's broadly what we do.
In a nutshell.
In a nutshell.
You started working there in 2013. So like you said, a year after it achieved charitable status. I mean, how did you hear about your then role as Projects and Fundraising Officer, and what appealed to you about it?
Well, I actually started at the Sustainable Food Trust as an unpaid intern slightly earlier on in 2013.
Oh, really? So you really were nearly there, but in the early days.
Yeah, it was in the run up to the first big conference that the Sustainable Food Trust organised, which was called True Cost Accounting in Food and Farming in London in 2013. And I had been looking for jobs for a while. I'd done a few things in different places, a few small internships and that sort of thing. Worked out that I think I really did want to work in the food and farming world, but didn't quite know how to get into it. So I just was basically ringing around organizations, and was obviously in the fortunate position to be able to say, I can, please let me come and work for you. I can work for you for a bit for free. Just so happened to be at a time when they were in a bit of a panic about organizing this conference, so they needed some extra hands on deck, and that's how I've been there basically. But yeah, it was the connection to farmers on the ground that really appealed to me about the organization.
Okay.
At the time, I had been studying soil science quite hard, so I was obviously really interested in that aspect of it, and it was that opportunity to marry up those two things which led me to the SFT, really. And it's been quite a journey since then.
Yeah, I mean, bringing us up to date, what do you mainly focus on in your role today?
At the moment, I'm broadly sort of looking after the organization as a whole. So we now have a team of about sort of 20 people.
Is it
But
that many now? Wow.
yeah, it's grown a bit in the last couple of years.
Okay.
A mixture of full-time and part-time staff, but we have a team of just under 20 people, and actually in our kind of ecosystem of people that are connected to us, consultants and advisors, it's about 40 people. So
Okay.
it's quite a network of different people that we're working with, and some amazing expertise that we're lucky to make use of. So I try and bring everyone together under a common understanding of what we're trying to do strategically as an organization. But I also focus quite a lot on a project called the Global Farm Metric, which is about creating a common set of metrics for measuring on-farm sustainability. That's probably my core area of work within the SFT.
Okay. So looking back over the last 8 years, nearly that you've that you've been at the trust, what do you think have been the main changes that you've noticed?
I think the biggest change, I was reflecting on this earlier today, I think the biggest change is that when even in sort of 2012, 2013, the work of the Sustainable Food Trust and many other organizations who are similar was seen to be quite a niche thing, to be honest. It was seen to be, I don't want to sort of stereotype, but I can put myself in this stereotype of like some hippies getting together and thinking, this is an alternative way of doing things, which is very much against the grain of the mainstream.
Yeah.
And I think that's really changed now. I think we and lots of other organizations are part of this mainstream discussion on agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
We now have a really strong relationship with the likes of the National Farmers Union, which for a small NGO working on sustainable farming might have been somewhat of a surprise 10 years ago. So it really, I think that's the biggest change, is that this has really moved from the outskirts of the conversation right into the center of where we need to go.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that runs quite well alongside actually changes in farming and ideas about farming as well. I mean, I'm really interested in your perspective of farming over that time as well.
Again, I think there's been huge changes. I think the next generation of farmers, but also young people who are buying food and eating food, and I think food is a wonderful area to be working in, because it's something everyone has to connect with on a daily basis. But I think there's a uprising of young people, especially, but not just young people, who want to know more about their food. So I think that's brought it more into the central public eye. But also I think there's some amazing farmers out there doing amazing things, and I think they're starting to show what's possible and starting to sort of inspire, whether it's the general public, policymakers or companies, that there is a way of making farming kind of the number one climate change solution amongst other benefits. So I think it's huge credit to those farmers who are sort of leading the charge and inspiring others. I think there's been a real change in that sense in the last 8 or so years.
Let's go back in time a bit. Tell me about your childhood and your life growing up. And I'm really interested whether you've always had an interest in the outdoors, that sort of realm.
Yeah, absolutely. My grandpa and my dad used to farm. We had a mixed farm in Shropshire, just outside Shrewsbury. We don't have that farm anymore, but it always sparked my interest, that sort of family history that we had. And we then moved to Sussex, and that's where I grew up and basically spent my entire childhood outside. It so happened that I spent my years growing up with horses. In the end, I became a horse person, which I really, I appreciate more than anything the discipline I think it gave me, because it's one of those things if you're lucky enough to look after a horse, then you need to be up at 7 o'clock and feed it every day. There's no excuse. You can't kind of go out and just jolly with your friends the whole time when you're a teenager. You have a responsibility, and it obviously means you're outside a lot of the time as well. So no, I was very lucky in that respect. And also just loads of walking and camping and building dens, climbing trees,
Nice.
basically anything which meant that I had muddy hands and knees
Yeah.
was my street when I was younger.
And yeah, you went to Exeter University to study geography, soil science, climate change, sustainability. Tell me about your time at Exeter.
Exeter was a great time in my life. Because I had come from quite a remote area where I grew up.
Yeah.
I think if I had gone to a really, really busy city, I think it would have slightly blown my main fuse. So Exeter
Yeah.
was a great stepping stone, which, it's a lovely place to be, but it's also obviously super close to Dartmoor on the coast. But it's also just a nice town, lovely people.
Yeah.
So I had a great time there, and I studied geography, but I always had this slight obsession with soil, which my friends at the time thought was very amusing. Still do, actually. I went to a barbecue the other day and I took my bottle, which I'm sure many of your listeners will have, from Groundswell, that says "I love soil,"
Yeah.
outside, and they're like, what is that? I mean, come on. I do love soil.
Yeah, exactly. I'm proud.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, throughout my A levels, I did quite a big project measuring biodiversity in habitats, and then for my dissertation at uni, I decided to do a project looking at the differences in soil carbon levels across different habitats at different stages of succession.
Okay.
So actually, there was really no agriculture involved in my degree, which I think is somewhat of a mistake. I think agriculture should be part of geography because it's essential land use, obviously.
Mm.
But no, really into soil. So spent a summer burning soil samples in a lab in Exeter, having a great time. So yeah.
Um, let's turn towards farming policy. The four parts of the UK will have subtly different post-Brexit farming and rural policies, but I'm interested in your take on the general direction that we seem to be going in.
I think the general direction is positive. I think there's a huge opportunity here, and I think possibly if there's any silver lining from Brexit, I think it is the kind of agricultural policy side of things. And I just hope that the DEFRA and the devolved nations really grab that policy with both hands. Because I think generally, as I said, the direction is good, but I do worry that we're slightly reverting back to old thinking a little bit with, for example, the ELM scheme in the way that it's set out at the moment, with the three pillars. So sustainable farming incentive being the first pillar, local nature recovery being the second pillar, and landscape nature recovery being the third pillar. And obviously there is some crossover there, but it does essentially separate farming from nature, which is kind of what the CAP did with pillar 1 and pillar 2. So we're very much of the opinion that farmers should effectively be rewarded through one scheme, which is very much integrated, which allows food production and nature to operate effectively in the same place. They don't need to be seen as separate. There are farmers out there who are demonstrating that you can do both at the same time. And I think it's worrying a little bit, the Climate Change Committee's recommendations of, I'm sort of simplifying slightly, but let's intensify on the best land and then effectively restore or rewild the rest.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really dangerous. I think we need to be thinking more holistically about the way we produce food. And so that would be my one worry. But obviously I was very fortunate to work with the Welsh government for a period of time, which was brilliant. The team were really, really innovative policy team in the Welsh government, and they all had roots back to farming, which I found really encouraging as well. But I do think the sustainable farming scheme that they're designing in Wales is that integrated approach.
Okay.
It's looking at nature recovery alongside farming and how the two things integrate. So I'm a really big fan of what they're trying to do.
Can we actually let's turn towards your two secondments actually just for a little bit, your time with the Welsh government and also your time with DEFRA. What did you take away from those, and just explain a little bit about what you were doing then?
Well, I learned a lot during both of them. That's for sure. It came about basically because we had a meeting back in 2017 with our SFT Farmers Working Group at an estate in Buckinghamshire, the Waddesdon estate. And we invited Michael Gove, when he was appointed Secretary of State for DEFRA, to come along and hear about our idea of creating a harmonized set of on-farm sustainability metrics, a project which we now call the Global Farm Metric. But basically, we had asked a group of farmers to go away and tell us what they thought they should be measuring, and effectively the best bits of all the audits they already do. So for their certification, compliance, single farm payment, stewardship, things like the Cool Farm tool, the carbon calculation tools. So all the things that farmers are already doing, what they felt the best bits were, and effectively they put together this framework of metrics that they felt represented a whole farm assessment. And so it was kind of early days in the project, but we presented our idea to Michael Gove. He really liked it, and he went, it was just before Christmas in 2017, so he obviously went away over Christmas, slightly rewrote his speech for the Oxford Farming Conference in January 2018, and announced during his speech at the Oxford Farming Conference the need for a gold standard metric for food and farming in the UK, which in his words should include a sensible basket of indicators. And then he also said in the same sentence that it could also be used as a brand British mark, effectively. And that was where it maybe went a bit wrong, in that DEFRA obviously, maybe weren't totally aware of what he was going to say, because it was just after Christmas. And they took that bit and thought, okay, let's put this in the food labelling team in DEFRA. And that's where I was then into part-time. Right. And it was, I have to say, a bit of a struggle, because, yes, food labelling could be an outcome of these common metrics. I think we do need a common way of communicating sustainability to the public on food products. But I don't think we should try and do that before we've got the farm metrics right first. And ultimately, our USP was always, this has to work for farmers on the ground. We have to create a set of metrics which allows every farmer around the world to become part of the change that we need to see. And so I was kind of constantly trying to do that in DEFRA, but from this food labelling team. And anyone who knows DEFRA or has worked in there before knows that it's quite difficult to work across teams or directors, as they call them. And so it was a little bit tricky, and also it was at the early stages of Elm. So to start thinking about how we're going to monitor the impact of Elm before it had really been designed was, again, quite a tricky thing to get their head around. But at the end of that year, I was talking to the Welsh government, who Patrick and I had known for quite a long time, and they were really, really keen on taking up the idea of a common set of metrics to measure the sustainable farming scheme that they were developing, and effectively making that a kind of prerequisite for entering into the new scheme. So it would be an annual assessment that you would use, not to kind of be hit with a policy stick necessarily, but just to justify to the Treasury that it was in fact a good use of taxpayers' money to be paying for farmers, because they were delivering these biodiversity benefits, these water quality benefits, air quality benefits, etc., all the different things we measure. But B, also for the Welsh government to know whether or not the scheme was actually working and helping farmers. So I went into the Welsh government for a year to work on what they were calling the Farm Sustainability Review. And I'm not seconded in there anymore, but we're still working really closely with the team there to make that happen. So it's an exciting time.
Exciting indeed. Challenging time as well. I ask quite a lot of guests this question, and it's a massive one. But I'm interested in your view again. What for you is the biggest rural challenge today? And there are several.
There are several, and I mean, I could probably pick a few. I think access to land is a really, really big one for young people. I was at a farm, at Patrick's farm actually in Wales, near Lampeter this weekend, and we had a kind of farm weekend with all sorts of interesting people, and a group of young Welsh growers came. They're sponsored by the Welsh government to do a tour of some horticulture operations in Wales, and they came along to the farm to kind of end that tour. And we had a wonderful conversation with them. They brought so much energy to saying, look, it's really hard because they don't have access to land. They really need farmers to cooperate and perhaps have some agreements or joint venture agreements where bits of the land were given over to vegetable production. It could mean that, for example, in Wales could become much more self-sufficient in vegetables. It's totally possible. It used to be done, but the infrastructure just isn't there for young people at the moment. So I think that's a really big challenge. I think the other huge challenge I see is that the divide between urban and rural is really, really big. And I live in London. About a year and a half ago, that felt like quite a strategic place to be.
Okay.
Slightly less so now. But even when I'm here and you're going into the supermarkets, you can become really disconnected really quickly from what's where your food comes from. And I do think that's a huge challenge. I think it can be sorted through greater transparency of supply chains. And I think that's a really exciting thing we're going to see develop quite quickly in the next few years. But I think that connection between farm and fork is a really big issue, because as much as there's a growing number of people who really are more conscious about what they eat, and I think that's being shown through the sort of vegetarian vegan movement, which is starting to evolve, which we would, I think yes, we need to eat less meat as a population generally, but I think the argument about lumping meat into one basket is a bit simplistic, which is a whole nother topic. But I do think that shows that people care more about what they eat, and therefore we need to give them better information upon which to make decisions which really support farmers. So I think that's a big challenge, but I really think we can overcome that one if we work together quite quickly.
What's next for you? You've got a lot on at the moment, but where would you like to go?
So it's a big
and just hope that Patrick's not listening.
Patrick is one of these people that I don't think will ever run out of energy. I actually think he might have ADHD. But no, I'm really excited about the future of the SFT. Actually, it feels like it's taken us this time, the last sort of 8 to 10 years, to really gain an identity as an organization. I think it naturally takes that time to do that. We've been fortunate to work with some amazing people, particularly our policy director, Richard Young, who has written some incredible reports for us along the way, including the Hidden Cost of UK Food report, which, if anyone hasn't read, it's a really fascinating read. It basically says that for every £1 we spend on food in the UK, there's another hidden pound that we don't realise we're paying for through our taxes and through environmental degradation, etc. And of course, public health impacts as well. So I think it's taken those sorts of reports for us to build up a bit of a credibility, but it feels like there's some real momentum behind what we're trying to do with various things at the moment. The global farm metric as a project is really flying, and I think it genuinely is a game-changing solution for agriculture across the world. So at least in the medium term, we're really gearing up now for COP26. We've got a few events in the pipeline around COP26 and Nature Day, which is on the 6th of November. So keep eyes and ears peeled for what's going on there. I can't really say anything yet because it's all a tiny bit fluid for obvious reasons. But some really exciting activity going on there. And no, I mean, I can't really say that I see myself stepping away from this area of work. I really love it. I think it's the most exciting area to be working in right now. I think it's one of, as we said at the beginning, I think it's one of the only industries that has the potential to totally turn itself around from being part of the problem in many ways to part of the solution.
Yeah.
And I think that's an amazing challenge to be working on. And everyone is, it's such a diverse set of people who are involved in food and farming. There's never a dull moment. It's
That's
great.
for sure. We always finish the show with the same 2 questions. The first is, if you had a message for the public, any message, what would it be?
My advice to the general public would be that you are part of this solution. It might feel small, the contribution you can make in the bigger picture of all the challenges we know we now face with climate change and health impacts. But actually, if everyone can just make 1 or 2 small changes, it adds up to a whole lot and can make a really big difference. And when it comes to food, it can be really difficult at the moment to decipher what's sustainable and what's less sustainable when you're buying food, particularly in the supermarket. But there's things you can look out for. There's obviously some of the certification labels, like organic or leaf, for example, which generally tell you that food has been produced in a sustainable way. We are at the moment trying to correct the transparency problems in the supply chain, and I think hopefully in the near future it will become much easier to be able to make those decisions based on things we all care about, like nature and climate, and health and wellness. But at the moment, I would suggest looking out for those things and thinking about what we can produce sustainably in the place where we live. And I'm just taking the example of plant-based products, and by no means this is the only example, but thinking about things which are often portrayed to us as being more sustainable and healthy are actually produced in a highly ultra-processed way using things from the other side of the world, which is potentially having a very big damage that we're not aware of. So I think it's important to think about where we are, what we can produce seasonally, locally where possible, and obviously sustainably, and we're hoping to be able to make that decision making much easier for consumers in the near future through the Global Farm Metric and through the partners that we're working with. But that would be my piece of advice. If you can just do one small thing to become that little bit more sustainable, it really will add up to make a huge difference.
Great. And finally, a message to farmers.
Message to farmers, I would say, is keep going. I think there's a lot of farmers out there who are doing things, making changes to their farming practices because they intuitively know it's right, not because they've been paid to do it. And I think that's really brave and really bold. So my message to farmers would be keep going. You're doing amazing things. You're inspiring so many people, and it will, the benefits will come flowing through. I can guarantee that. So I know it's difficult, and it must feel like you're in a headwind at the moment, and I admire everything you guys are doing, because ultimately that's why we're here. So that's my message.
Well, I'm sure that message will go down well. Adele, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. And good luck for what I'm sure will be an exciting career for you, and also I'm sure the SFT as well has lots of growth ahead of it as well.
Thank you, Ben. It's been a pleasure to be on. So look forward to talking more in future, and seeing what we can all do together.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for listening. Next week on the show, we'll be looking back on the farming year with a few farmers. So I hope you can join me for that. But until then, have a great week.